my platform and the majority of the population I work with is menopausal women, and or the other side of the spectrum is like post-progressive young athletes. So I don't really mess with the in-betweeners. You guys can figure all that stuff out. For this, I wanted to look at the effects of chronic inflammation, not acute. There's a ton of research on acute. There is not that much on chronic, especially within the older population. And I used my dependent variable C-reactive protein, high sensitive C-reactive protein, and I kind of feel like that's more relevant. It's kind of what we normally pull when we pull labs. So there's other biomarkers that we could use as well, but that was kind of my main focus here. So I figured I'd start with some quotes because everybody has a quote. Every single person who receives this type of treatment develops this inflammation in the lower rectal area. It means you have fucking inflammation in your asshole. I have no idea whoever made that, but I thought it was cute. But I figured it was a good way to start into this conversation because I'm not really professional, so I don't really understand. But this one really makes sense. Although the mechanism isn't clear yet, strenuous exercise changes the categories of genes that prevent the development of chronic inflammation, which more and more is believed to be the underlying cause of many chronic conditions. I feel like there's a lot of truth to that, and we're going to get to some of it. So inflammation. So Mike and I were just talking about this yesterday actually. So the deeper I was diving into inflammatory response, the more I realized I have no idea what happens. And the reality is everything I got from this, I just realized the inflammation itself is just simply a response that the body has. And that's the simplistic way to look at it. We don't have to get more deeper into that unless you want to. But that's how I'm looking at it this. So we're looking at two different various types, acute and chronic. So chronic-wise is a little bit different, obviously. And the way I was looking at it and the way I kind of see things, and one of the conditions that I came across was myositis, which is you're actually starting to deplete fibers. And you're starting to break down the muscle and the tissue. A couple of things that are relevant, autoimmune disease, chronic inflammation in the sense of overuse injuries could be a factor of chronic inflammation. So just so you guys understand the difference. Viral infections as well is probably a pretty big one. So now I want to start tying some things in together. So my population, menopausal women. In the sense of menopause is the cessation of the menstrual cycle and the period. Well, what comes with the cessation of that is a lot of suppression of hormones, right? So one of the things that we found out too is I'm going to use estrogen because Ben just tied estrogen into a lot of his talk. So when estrogen starts to decrease, it actually starts to enhance pro-inflammatory cytokines, which is like, oh shit. So a menopausal woman, if they're chronically inflamed, they become even more chronically inflamed because of menopause in itself. So they're kind of fighting a double-edged sword. That's why this population is so intriguing to me, is because there's so many different things that are going south. So other things, we just talked about testosterone, different things like that. So that all starts to suppress. And one kind of caveat to this that you guys should understand too, and this is just something not related, but you guys should understand. If a woman is on hormone replacement therapy and their estrogen and testosterone start to elevate, that can affect muscle strength and performance too. So it can be a negative aspect as well. So it's something just to pay attention to. All right, cool. So progesterone, estrogen, obviously suppressed, they flatline. One of the things about a menopausal woman or a woman in general, once their hormones suppress, they flatline and they kind of cruise through the rest of life. As opposed to a man, it's a little bit different. So just so you guys understand the concept, and I don't want to crush estrogen too much, but I want you guys to wrap your head around what really happens to a woman here as they start getting older. Estrogen improves muscle mass and strength and increases the collagen content of connective tissue. So if you guys understand that and how important estrogen is, what happens when it starts to suppress? Negative aspects start to happen, right? So just so you guys understand that aspect. So this one, inflammatory markers and loss of muscle mass, sarcopenia, and strength. So pretty big population they studied. What they did is they did grip strength, they used bioimpedance, and they also used C-reactive protein. Now, this is kind of where things started really accumulate for me, and I started realizing how the effect of chronic inflammation started affecting muscle hypertrophy. So what they did is, ideally, in C-reactive proteins, when you look at it in systemically for a woman, anything above 3 starts to ring alarms. And then, your general practitioner will say, okay, something's going on here, inflammation-based wise. In this study, what they found, anything above 6 was a 2 to 3-fold higher chance of a 40% suppression in muscle strength. So Mike and I just said, we were just talking about, is there really a direct biomarker for C-reactive protein in the sense of inflammation. And I would use 6 as the biomarker, because if we're starting to see negative results at 6 milligrams per liter inside of the body, then I would say anything above that, you're going to have negative connotations with muscle, meaning you're not going to be able to grow muscle. And that's something that this is showing. So now we start getting into the nitty-gritty. And please ask questions if you do. I'm talking fast. We only have 20 minutes. So this I thought was very particular, and I was really excited when I actually came across this. So population's small, it's only 23. They use muscle biopsy, and they did this in vitro. So what they do is they induced it with C-reactive protein, and they use 15 milligrams per liter, which ideally that's pretty high, but I guess they're trying to elicit a response and kind of see what happens. So, and the other cool caveat to this is they actually use physically active elderly people. So it wasn't just somebody that was already chronically inflamed. So they actually did biomarkers, they made sure they were healthy, they made sure they were active in the sense of movement. So every person in the study moved about 30 minutes a day, and they used about 3 meds. So that's essentially just casual walking. And what the study revealed is that even in physically active elderly, systemically inflammation status exerts a significant influence on skeletal muscle mass. So that's pretty, right there that kind of gives you a good idea of what chronic inflammation is doing to the muscle cells. And one thing is how they really figured this out was it was increasing the doubling time of myoblasts, which systemically was increasing the proliferation rate inside of the muscle. So it was, drawing a negative aspect there. So this is kind of cool because that always talks about SMI, right? So, and what I said to you already, so 3 milligrams per liter is kind of like that threshold for a woman. So what they do is this is directly correlation. So anything around the 3 mark was showing that there was less percentages of SMI on the body. So as the C-reactive protein was suppressing, it was a direct relation to a higher percentage of SMI. All right, so this is like the most exciting find that I ever found. So the same authors came back 3 years later to find the exact mechanisms of why this actually happens. So they drew on a higher population. It was the same aspect. What they did is, 118 people now, they still did the muscle biopsy. They still use C-reactive protein as the biomarker, and they came out and they actually found the mechanism of links. So it wasn't the proliferation rate now it was the phosphorylation of the cells. So what they realized is that there was a negative impact of phosphorylation on muscle protein synthesis. So what it was doing was phosphorylating AMPK, and it was negatively phosphorylating NKT. So it was not allowing protein synthesis to happen. So the chronic inflammatory state of the body was not allowing muscle protein synthesis to happen, which means it was also negating hypertrophic response. It wasn't allowing the cell to regenerate. So that means it was also not allowing recovery. So the craziest thing is if somebody older was in a chronic inflammatory state, and we as practitioners or trainers, because most of us are trainers, you were not paying attention to that, or you were not asking the right questions for your older client, and you just went in there, especially like Johnny, new trainer from 24 Hour Fitness, I just got my cert. He's like, yeah, bro, I'm gonna crush this chick. He goes in there and he does 100 leg extensions on this older lady. She's not recovering because she's inflamed. She's never coming back to the gym. Evidently, what you're going to do, and this is a whole other topic of conversation, it's causing more damage. As opposed to, like, acutely, inflammation's great. Like, there's a direct response to it being good. Chronically, it's all bad news bears. So, this kind of shows, the idea behind it, and this just goes in a little bit deeper. So, another direct correlation here, low muscle mass had a higher CRP. Whether that's the C-reactive protein causing less muscle, or whether it's somebody who's inactive going through that late menopausal stage, not working out anymore. Ideally, what happens within the population when I start seeing a woman who might be postmenopausal or going through the transitional stage, their primary care physician says, you should eat less and you should stop moving as much. I'm like, you fucking serious? Like, here we got to worry about osteoporosis, which is the biggest worry for me when I think about a woman as they get older. And you just told her to eat less and move less? She blows my mind. So then I have to unwind that and unpack it because no, I'm not a doctor, so why should they trust me? But then I'm telling them like, yo, you got to eat more and move more. And the reality is what they found in an alternate study is that even though they're less sensitive to protein, they still need more protein. So it's important, right? So this wasn't really a big suppressant finding for me in the sense of C-reactive protein, but I wanted to introduce this too. So CD14 and CD16, there was a lot bigger findings in that realm, but I mean the study was huge. But what I wanted you guys to understand, so they did a active population and an inactive population. And in the inactive population, they made them active. So they did an aerobic style, I think it was 20 minutes a day, and they did resistance training 3 times a week. But if you look at this, so the pre-size, so the active population is in the white. Their C-reactive protein was generally lower to begin with, as opposed to the inactive was higher. And then when it became active, it suppressed a little bit. So C-reactive protein-wise, it didn't change that much, but it did in other things. What I want you guys to recognize here, though, is, so look at their body mass. So pre and post, right? Their body mass went up, their body fat percentage went down. So what does that mean? Their lean mass went up, right? So the other caveat to that is the C-reactive protein is not like it's not really that high. It's at 3.5. It is above the norms, but it's not ridiculous as like a 6 or 15 mgs per liter. So the other thing that I want you guys to understand too, if you have an older client and certain things, you have to talk to them. And older clients can get stronger, they can grow muscle as long as they're not in a chronic inflammatory state. So this proves it here. Leg press, all of their strengths went up. Their VO2 max went up. What is VO2 max? Does anybody know? And it stands for mortality. VO2 max, all-cause for mortality. It's one of our markers as well as grip strength. So if you start weight training, and this is how I'm selling them, if you start weight training and as long as you're not in a chronic inflammatory state, I'm making you live longer. Is that direct? No, but it makes sense there. Anything to get them exercising. I mean, no. I don't put it on paper so they can't reflect that. It's just a conversation. So what I wanted you guys to do is paint the picture. So what do we understand? Like chronic inflammation, you're not growing muscle. That's what I'm seeing from the research. So the reality is what should we do first if we have an older client and now we're actually diligent enough to say, okay, so we look at their, some of their, responses to our client questionnaire. They're like, okay, well, they can't digest well, they sleep poorly, all this other stuff. And then we actually get a lab from them, and then we see that their CRP is elevated. So now we have to try to unpack that a little bit before we start hammering them down. We can keep it simple and do some kind of endurance exercise that's not going to elicit a huge response, just to kind of get them activated. And what you want to do is you want to draw a habit, right? Because if a person is used to going to the gym, that's what they're going to do. So these are just some tips. You obviously don't have to read all these, but I'll give you guys the slides if you work with a population that's older. This is all based on science, and I'll give you guys all the research behind it too. I just didn't have enough room banged out at me for my slides being too popular. The other thing I found, I thought this was awesome. So grapeseed extract. I had no idea. So grapeseed extract supplementation effectively prevents muscle wasting, and in mice, it wasn't in humans, but it was still correlating, showing that grapeseed extract can be used as an auxiliary treatment for muscle loss associated with chronic inflammation and fertility. So that's pretty important, and it's pretty simple that you can add. This is just some of the metabolic processes that we should understand. Just teach you guys to understand AMPK and NKT. That's definitely not my scope, so there was a lot of learning that I had to do with that, which was exciting because the whole premise of this was starting to learn new stuff. I definitely didn't want to speak what I was comfortable on. Now, Mike and I were just talking about this. So ibuprofen has kind of been like the naysay inside of the muscle hypertrophy world. But if you have an older client who has maybe some sort of arthritic ability or inability, or the joints, whatever the situation might be, and they do take ibuprofen daily, it's a thing. Like that's what they take to move most of the time. So what I found here is concluded that a moderate dose of 400 milligrams of ibuprofen ingested after repeated resistance training session does not impair muscle hypertrophy or strength. It does not affect ratings of muscle soreness. So that was pretty big finding. Ideally, it is obviously a small population. There is other papers that are on this subject, and Mike made me aware of those as well. But ideally, it was the 800 milligram mark. And if you're in the military, all they give you, no matter what happens, you break your leg, here's 800 milligrams of ibuprofen. See ya. All right, so one other picture. These are two clients of mine that I work with continuously. They are right now going through menopause. This was 3 weeks ago. You can't see that, but that's 300 pounds there. They pull 295 off the ground continuously. They are not on hormone replacement therapy. They're just normal-ass chicks who like to do big things. The big caveat to menopausal women, when a woman goes through menopause, it's harder. It's more strenuous. I would never experience it. But the reality is if you eat right, you exercise, you watch your sleep, you do all the right things, it doesn't have to be as bad as most of you make it out to be. Cool, that's all I got. Anybody got any questions?
Yeah. One question. What would be your advice about a woman who is insistent in asking if she should use hormone replacement therapy? Because at least the women I've dealt with, that's usually the first question that they would ask.
Without a doubt, I get it asked all the time.
Yeah.
And ideally, if you have the right internal platform, I don't think it's a bad idea. And I think if it's done right, like low doses of estrogen, a little bit of progesterone mixed in with that, and a moderate dose of testosterone, debating if they even want to go that route. Ideally, I always tell women, and obviously I'm just giving you advice, I'm not prescribing anything. I always say go estrogen, progesterone at first, because that could be a big solver of the problem. I've worked with a lot of DOs that go the other way around. They go with a little bit of testosterone, and then let estrogen and progesterone elevate on itself. In the research in itself, I like the idea of low dosing estrogens. That is a little bit more prevalent than the testosterone in itself. So right now, pellets are huge because it's super simplistic, and 6 months. But ideally, there's so much of a crash by month 4 that the woman's back in my office complaining. Their weights have dropped significantly. So they start. When a woman starts to pick up big, heavy things, they enjoy that shit because it's empowering. If that starts to decrease, it kills them. It's like calling, like I just seen Dean, I was like, bro, you look skinny. What happened? You lost weight?
Man, you didn't say that.
I did say that. I did say it, but if I did say that too, it would kill him. So, yeah. So
you're
that's so red. But yeah, ideally I use that advice and I do give them papers, and if they do go to a hormonal replacement specialist, I do have them bring those papers with me and say, hey, look, the literature states this. And it is becoming more prevalent in research, and I think we're going to really get a better idea. But kind of like Ben was saying, like, in a woman, what do we really know? And what Jody and I were just talking about, one of the biggest reasons why I did my thesis in grad and why I will do my dissertation on menopause is because everybody's afraid of the menopausal woman.
Yeah.
Because it's so fucking complicated.
Yeah, it is.
Let alone, like, you can't even fathom the conversations that I have with these women. Like, take your wife in times of like 50. Because they don't give a fuck what they say to me because there's no repercussions. So they're having a bad day. Like, dude, luckily I was a professional boxer and I can take hits in the cheek, but it's complicated. But I just try to do my best, and I try to calm them down and give them the best insight I possibly have. And, I dig into research and just give them the best advice. And that, what's that?
So, did you find any research where they gave HRT to inflamed women and then had a hypertrophic protocol? Does that exist?
No, I haven't seen any of that. I mean, these two pieces of paper were hard to find in itself. So, I don't know. I mean, that could be my next, maybe North Carolina talk. I mean, that might be it.
So then, along those lines, then, the inflammation negates potential for hypertrophy.
Yes.
But then, if we're adding in, especially we're talking about, an estrogen-based HRT, does that create further inflammation?
No, not that I've seen. But
Okay.
if you think about like what estrogens do, so estrogens are great for muscle energy metabolism. They're great for muscle cell viability. So that's a big kind of capability there. So if they're suppressed and they're pulling up pro-inflammatory cytokines, they're going to start inhibiting different factors. So you're going to start creating that chronic inflammatory environment. If you induce it and you start suppressing those, whether there's a direct confrontation between elevated estrogens and suppressing the cytokines, I'm not sure. but you would assume so just by looking at the literature. So if you elevate estrogens, then you're starting to get better cellular function. So then you would have to assume that it would be a better environment to grow more muscle, as long as you're getting those AMP and those NKT pathways enhanced. Because if you look at AMPK, it's more of like a catabolic state, as an NKT is more of an anabolic state. So as long as you're hammering those pathways and you can have hypertrophic response, then absolutely. But you got to have the environment, right? And then after you have the environment, then you elicit the response.
From a marker perspective, are you just looking at CRP, or you find other?
No, me
markers?
personally?
No, not you. Just in research, are there other markers that you could?
Oh, there's a
include?
ton of different markers. So, yeah, you could look at white blood cell count. You could look at platelets. You could look at neutrophils. You could look at any other kind of cytokines, IL-6, TNF alpha. What else do we in mind? Anybody else got any other markers? Those are my main ones that I go to. No, but
But
those
CRP is the.
CRP is the easiest. It's very inexpensive,
Yeah.
especially if I run something, say, like if I run a nutrition protocol. $18 later, I get to pull another CRP to see if it's effective. So, to me, it seems the most simplistic. And the reality, when regarding research, it's more prevalent in the research than not. But it did like the CD14, CD16, like that's pretty prevalent in the research as well. Those are inflammatory markers. So they're inflammatory proteins that cause inflammatory. But there's other ones that you can use. But ideally, I would take that C-reactive protein and I would correlate them with the other markers. Especially like who doesn't get a white blood cell count and whenever they go get a physical or something like that. So I've already seen a general practitioner will add CRP if you ask them to, HSCRP.
Yeah.
So you can just correlate those factors. And in a chronic inflammatory state, you'll see if that happens.
I like the what you did with the ibuprofen. That was really cool. What is the earliest that you've seen when you go through menopause, and what is the latest you've seen with your experiences?
Oh, without a doubt. So if they have a condition called PCOS, or if they get their ovaries pulled, I mean, I have a client right now that I've been working with for almost about a year, and she's 32. She's already postmenopausal. Also, the menopause stage, I mean, ideally what they say is around 7 years they can be perimenopausal. So ideally you're going to see them somewhere in their 40s. And the dynamic for menopause is somewhere around 51. And usually that 1 year after cessation of their period is when they hit postmenopause. But, I mean, I've seen women going into their 60s with still vasomotor symptoms and different things like that. So you get to remember, like, everything in research goes on the population base, right? But, I mean, I've seen all kinds of fluctuations. You kind of just have to go off of whatever the person's feeling. And the reality is every woman that I've ever come across, all they care about, everyone that I've ever come across, all they care about is this. Why can't I get rid of this pooch? And when I figure it out, we're all millionaires, because there'll be no doubt. But I don't know if I'm close yet.
Where in the country are you practicing?
Maryland.
What's the cultural population? So my curiosity is in a society where getting older or menopausal state is not considered a negative thing socially, or we see a similar reaction inflammatory-wise, like how much of it is cultural?
Yeah, man, that's a hell of a question. I don't know. I mean, if you look at, in a sense of cultural, just going over the stuff that I've ever learned in school, like if you look at lower income type housing, you're probably going to see, just dynamically speaking. But I live in Annapolis where it's very higher end, so you're usually seeing the chronic inflammatory state because they're drinking or they live that alternate lifestyle, that better, higher end lifestyle. A couple other things. One, I have a group on Facebook. It's called Embracing the Change. I pump a ton of information on that. It is a group with a lot of women, and the best thing I love about it is the women will integrate their experiences, and they kind of feed off each other. I'll give them the information, and they use it, and then they ask me questions. The second thing is I'm currently writing a book right now. It's called Muscles Over Menopause, and it's the 10 steps to master menopause. So I would love, if anybody works in this space, I love insight. I am all about adding somebody to the book as well, because I know I'm not going to be able to do it by myself. And I love to just hear your guys' experiences, because with a menopausal woman, man, there's just so much shit out there. And I think if we figure it out, man, like women more and more are realizing that you're not going to get all big and bulky from lifting weights. And they're starting to like that shit, and they want to pick up heavy stuff. And I'm going to be there to give them.
So when does your supplement come out for postmenopausal women?
I'm pretty sure you'll be helping me develop it, so you'll know.
Super quick, it's more logistical. You might have answered it. I'm always curious about how, especially people kind of in this room, administer like the education piece. Like, is it like training sessions and then Facebook group? Are there other sessions for like what are we doing nutrition wise? Like, how do you kind of set up your systems? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, ideally, I try to go from every asset I possibly can to implement as much information as I can.
Do you do like separate like nutrition?
Without a doubt, I do a ton of consulting.
Yeah.
I feel one-on-one is always the best platform to get it into somebody's head, especially when you're taking a woman, say 50 years old, and they've lived the last 20 years raising children or whatever the situation might be, and they haven't exercised or they don't pay attention to themselves, and now all of a sudden they're like, shit. So you want to get them in that separate platform and really find out what's going on and what's their reason, like why do they want to look better? And then I start going after that. And I always go after the first limiting factor that I recognize, and that's usually always going to be the gut. I try to fix things there first, and then everything kind of falls in place. But a lot of women always come to me first. They're like, "Hey, so what's the testosterone?" I'm like, what? No, you just ate Chick-fil-A. Like, you want testosterone? Fix your gut first. Does anybody have a talk on gut function? Mr. Kim, you got a talk on gut function? Oh.
You just pointed at me. Nice.
I cool. Any more questions? Personal, yeah. Yeah, I know. It's so funny when I do that. I'm starting to get more and more into doing with, gynecologists and giving talks like that from my perspective. And they always look at me like, you. But the reality is I have broke odds throughout my life. And when I heard a lot of people talk about you can't figure this out, I'm like, dude, I'm gonna figure this shit out. So that was probably the main premise. I want to make a footprint in this industry, and I didn't feel like it was going to be kind of chasing the same thing with nutrition or everywhere else. And I feel like when I started researching, I'm like, dude, there's not a lot of research in this field. There is in a sense of disease sets, which makes sense because that's where the funding comes from. But I wanted to make sense of like, I want to keep women jacked because, just not focused on it. If a woman walks into a doctor's office and they talk to a general practitioner and they're like, hey, look, I train, I do this, and I want to keep training. But that doesn't give a fuck.
Yeah.
They're not going to say, oh, here, we'll pull hormonal pin-ups, I want to see what's going on. They're going to say you're 48 years old, who gives a shit? And that was another thing that when we talk about that.
Well, from an HRT perspective, you're really balancing what risk and reward. If your reward for low dose hormones is, hey, I get to keep lifting, hey, I get to keep my vaginal tissue, which sounds pretty solid. What are your negatives?
In the sense of hormonal replacement therapy, it depends on what they're going into the situation with too. So ideally, the biggest thing that comes up is, what about breast cancer? So, you can get your BRCA1 gene tested. You can get that aspect kind of cleared beforehand. You also look at family history. And ideally, what I've come across in literature, there's no family history. If you want to go through that extent of getting that BRCA1 gene tested, then you're pretty much in the clear. But ideally, if you're monitoring your situation, if you're doing your labs at least once a year, you can pay attention to that stuff and you can stay ahead of it. But in the reality is, if you have this predisposition of getting breast cancer, I feel, this is my view, that you're going to get it. Maybe HRT might push you there a little bit faster, but most likely you're going to get it anyway. But I feel like just pay attention to that.
It seems similar to me. Like, this prostate cancer is probably the biggest risk
Yeah.
of HRT, and it seems like breast cancer and endometrial cancer and ovarian cancers and cervical cancers are growing because estrogen needs to grow, right? So now you're running growth pathways for longer.
Yeah. But going a little bit deeper on that, when we're talking about low dose estrogens, it's not very much. Yeah, so it's like you're not pushing estrogen through the system where you're creating a super perpetual growth environment. It's only essentially getting them back up to this, essentially like a homeostatic state to where they just feel better. And you're allowing other capabilities to happen. kind of what Ben was talking about. If you have a little bit of testosterone, but you have cellular receptivity, you're going to have some sort of growth. And that's what you're doing. You're giving your body the opportunity. If it's baseline 0, your progesterone, estrogen are on the bottom, you're not giving your body that opportunity. So you're not going to have cellular growth.
So most of the risk of cancer, particularly from hormone replacement therapy, comes from the old days when they were doing things like heparin, which is hormones isolated from horse urine that they were then giving to women. And when you then look at more recent, if you do bioidentical hormone replacement, so you actually give estradiol, progesterone, testosterone, and you start it early after menopause, then you can reduce cardiovascular disease risk, and it doesn't really increase cancer risk. But there's like a window. So obviously, if you're thinking about muscle mass and fitness, yes, that will be important at any time. And for cognition, Alzheimer's disease, you can also start at any time. But for cardiovascular disease risk, you have to start it early. But if you do it with bioidentical hormones, the risk is almost negligible.
100%. And that's being more and more exposed to where you're not throwing that scare tactic at them anymore. I mean, I think just because in the United States, everybody's doing it now. It's kind of like it's competitive.
Are there risks associated with abruptly stopping estrogen therapy? Or would you just stop
Yeah.
testosterone? So like let's say you have a client come in, decide to go through the process, and then last minute, right, she reads a paper on cetaceans or the cancer and stops.
Yeah, I've never seen something on a low dose estrogen in the sense of abruptly stopping that. But I think if you abruptly stop anything, there's going to be some sort of rebounding action inside of the body. Same thing if there was an SSRI or anything. I think you're going to get some sort of rebound. What that might be, I'm not quite sure. But ideally, I don't know. Does anybody else have an answer to that question?
They're in a good situation because they're not producing anything.
Right.
Like they're already off.
Yeah, they
Like,
might.
they're just gonna go back to basics. Same thing with guys on TRT.
Nothing shut
If
down.
they take them off, it does get worse. Like it's not like they go further down; they just go back to feeling shit,
So there's a floor, essentially.
which is a huge psychological thing. So that's like with those 2 CTE guys, they don't feel that bad right now, and they're in the 300s. I'm like, dude, if you go up to 900, you're gonna feel amazing, and then you're never gonna want to feel like that again.
Yeah.
Because their subjective feelings are, they don't realize that they necessarily feel shit.
That's exactly what goes back to what I was saying earlier. So when a woman goes on a pellet, probably about a month and a half, about 45 days, they're peaked. And I was seeing 220 on the total testosterone on labs with pellets. And
220?
Yeah.
A female?
Yeah. I mean, one of my clients too,
Whoa.
and it wasn't a ridiculous dose. It was just normal, and she was feeling fucking awesome. But the retrospect, I mean, her husband thought I was the best guy in the world. I'll tell you, we could talk about O shots and vaginal and other stuff too. That replenishes women's. Anyway, but the reality is by month 3 it starts to suppress, and then they don't feel like the same way they did, and then month 4, and then all of a sudden it's dropped off, and that's why a woman's not prone and sticking a needle in her ass or stomach, wherever you put it, but that's why they go to the pellets. But there's ebbs and flows with everything. There's always gonna, to me, I think there's always gonna be some sort of negative with every positive.
Yep.
So they just have to justify what that is. And as long as you're upfront with them, so they're not blindsided, where it's like, oh, you should feel good for the rest of your life, and you say, hey, look, this is going to do this. None of this. They have to make the decision. We all have controls of our own bodies. We divulge the information. You do what you want with it. Anything else? You're good? Yeah. Now I can take my shirt off.
Yeah, I think the breaks are really, really important here.